Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. We talked a lot about the Myles Garrett trade request from a lot of different angles. The players, the fans, the Browns management side. But let's look at this through Myles Garrett's side, right? Let's look at this trade request and how he could make this trade request happen, because there's a lot going against this request being fulfilled, if I'm being honest with you. One, the Browns, the number one thing going against Myles right now is dead money. Right now, the Browns have $39 million on their salary cap of dead money. Now, dead money, for those of you who don't know, is money that you have to account for on the salary cap that is going to players who no longer play for the Cleveland Browns or count on your active roster. For example, Zadarius Smith and Amari Cooper. Zadarius Smith is owed $14 million in dead money this year for the Cleveland Browns, and Amari Cooper is worth $22.5 million. Part of the reason you were able to command such a high trade package for like an Amari Cooper, getting a third-round pick for him, was because you had to eat that $22 million, which means that part of what got you that third-round pick for Amari Cooper was eating $22 million for a third-round pick. It's almost like the Browns paid for a third-round pick from Buffalo. Kind of the reverse of the Brock Osweiler trade, right, if you remember that. Myles Garrett has a dead cap number of $36 million if you move him this year. Now, you could split that up over 2 seasons if you do a post-June 1st trade for Myles Garrett. So it would be like $14 million this year would be in dead cap, and then next year another $20 million would be hit in dead cap if you traded Myles post June 1st, which would make it a little bit more manageable, but not preferable, right? I think the Browns would prefer, if they had to trade him in the offseason of 2026. I've said it a lot of times, the salary cap is malleable, right? It can be moved, it can be maneuvered, especially if you're willing to spend cash. Now, there are obvious limits to that ideology. Dead money is one of those limits. Mismanaging dead money is the thing that makes it hard to make the salary cap malleable, right? So if you want to do the things to manipulate the salary cap so you can avoid a giant penalty for Deshaun Watson in his contract, well, you got to manage the amount of dead money you have. Right now, the Browns have about $40 million of dead money, which is about as much as they can really have right now for this season, while still being able to manipulate the salary cap. If they have more than this, it's going to start to become a problem, especially when you consider that Deshaun Watson, at least for this year, again, they're going to get injury insurance for him next year, but that relief does not come until 2026. You got to treat Deshaun Watson's cap hit, whether it's going to be $72 million or, you restructure it down to $35 or $39 million. You have to treat all of that as dead cap. And then there's Myles's, right? So like potentially an extra $100 million of theoretical dead cap that the Browns would add if they trade Myles Garrett. All of this being said, it just makes it super unlikely that Myles Garrett gets moved, because while the salary cap is malleable, while the Browns have tools to manipulate the cap, Myles, the dead money associated with them, trading him this offseason would put that at a point to where you would be locked up and you wouldn't really be able to have a lot of options this year. Like, I've seen people be like, hey, you could trade Myles Garrett for Micah Parsons. You really can't, right? Because you would have to eat the dead cap for Myles Garrett and then absorb whatever money is left on Micah Parsons' contract for 2025, 2026, and so far and beyond. It just wouldn't be feasible. And even like if you're adding extra first-round picks this year, it makes it difficult because first-round picks get paid money, right? They get paid. So you're bringing in more money per year. If you trade for another top 5 pick, you're talking about another $7 million to add to that draft pool. So now you're talking about needing like $25 million to be able to sign all of your rookies on top of anybody that you want to bring in free agency and so on and so forth. So if you have a giant dead cap penalty, it's going to make it hard to do any of that. And it's going to make it virtually impossible to add draft picks and free agents in the same offseason. So yes, the salary cap is malleable, but there are limits to that. And dead money really forces the Browns' hand. Trading Myles Garrett will force the Browns' hand, and it leads to a situation where the Browns would be better off if they just did nothing with Myles Garrett, right? Like just didn't accept the trade request. He sat out for a year. They would be in a better situation money-wise if they just played that scenario out versus if they traded him, because again, they would be limited on what they could even bring back this year in a trade compensation because of that. So makes it all very unlikely that they're going to move him in 2025, which means that Myles has to have a red button to force the Browns to trade him. Now, what is a red button? It's a button you push to make the Browns super uncomfortable and force their hand and make them do something they don't want to do. And that's what this whole trade scenario is going to be about, right? The Browns don't want to trade Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett doesn't want to play for the Cleveland Browns. Somebody's going to have to do something they don't want to do. And as it's currently constituted, the Browns are basically the house in this game, right? In this blackjack game. And the house usually wins. So if you're Myles Garrett, you want to tilt the cards in your favor, you have to have a red button you can push. What is that red button? Well, we'll discuss in this video. So the red button push number one that I have here is that Myles Garrett could just start skydiving and in doing all of these dangerous activities that his contract expressly forbids him from doing in order to try to get the Browns to void his guarantees. This is a scenario that makes sense if you bring it up in a conversation and you don't really think about it that much. But the more you think about this scenario, the dumber it is. Because if Myles Garrett started bungee jumping and skydiving and playing basketball again and doing all these things his contract says he can't do anymore, well, then he's also risking injury, right? And getting injured is really the only way he's going to force the Browns' hand. And he can't fake an injury because the Browns are going to be very thorough on their evaluation. I could just take Myles' word for it and say, oh, yeah, you're injured. Like, he has to get legitimately injured for any kind of process to trigger that would void his guarantees. And even then, it's still a process that the Browns themselves have to say they want to do, right? If he gets injured skydiving and the Browns don't decide to void his guarantees or to void the rest of his contract, it's not going to matter. And even if they void his guarantees, I don't believe that means that voids the rest of his contract. So you could have him on contract. He just wouldn't have the guarantees that were on his contract anymore. And again, if we're talking about trading Myles, it still doesn't make him easier to trade in 2025. Now, some people have brought up this idea that Myles Garrett is going to basically renegotiate his contract with the Cleveland Browns to void all of his money to make it so that the Browns don't have to incur any dead cap hit for trading him this year. And that way it'll be easier for the Browns to trade him. I think that is goofy. The reason I think that is goofy is there is no mechanism in the NFL that's going to allow a player to do that. If Myles Garrett and his agent decide to do it, one, his agent would quit because that would reduce his agent's paycheck. Two, the NFLPA would step in almost immediately and say, nah, man, this is not something that we're going to allow you to do as a member of the NFLPA. Like, that's going to hurt other players who are not Myles Garrett. So no on that. And the CBA isn't really going to leave room for you to be able to do that, because then that could be used as a loophole, which could become very problematic for the league in years to come. There's no way that happens, right? Like, he can't just do that. It's cartoonish almost. Yeah, but let's get back to the whole, just basically doing everything your contract doesn't allow you to do. Another downside of this is that it would make him look like a jackass to most people, right? If Myles Garrett is requesting a trade because he wants to win a championship and he's spending his offseason skydiving, bungee jumping, doing all these other things he's not supposed to be doing. It's going to look a certain type of way. So you got to deal with that hit to your public image. I just saw Myles on a Super Bowl ad the other day. So like I would assume he wants his public image to be very strong so he can keep up those kind of advertisements. So I doubt he does something like that. Like think about what happened to Le'Veon Bell when he did that. And another thing we got to think about, right? And this is unique to the NFL versus any other sports league. The NFL is a legitimate cartel. Now, you could argue that all sports leagues are cartels, but the NFL not just is a legitimate cartel, they operate like a legitimate cartel. Like we saw this go down with Lamar Jackson when he wanted guaranteed money, and basically all 32 teams colluded so he wouldn't get guaranteed money, so they wouldn't reset a standard. The NFL is a lot more ruthless in these types of situations, and they have a lot less patience for this kind of stuff. So Myles is going to have to walk a fine line that's just going to offend the Browns, but not offend broader NFL ownership, because then it makes it so that the other teams would basically agree to not do anything that would help Myles in that situation. All of that makes Red Button 1 seem like a terrible move, in my opinion. Let's look at Red Button push number 2, which is basically he ain't going to play in 2025. Now, this is about as radical as he can go. Like if Myles is fully intent on being traded, this is the move that will eventually get him traded, right? Like guaranteed eventually get him traded. It's also as extreme as you can go to piss off a team without pissing off the rest of the league, right? We've seen Trent Williams do this. Deshaun Watson did this, which is going to come up. And I think this is definitely the plan for Myles Garrett, or at least what he wants us to believe the plan is. He has made statements and gestured towards the ideal of like, oh, I don't care about making the Hall of Fame, or I don't care about the stats and stuff. Like he said that almost on every stop he was at in Radio Row. And I think that was intentional, because he's basically trying to signal, I'm okay with sitting out a year if it comes down to it, right? Like that's what he's trying to play in this game of poker between him and Andrew Berry, that he's willing to sit out for a year. This is the most conventional strategy and the most logical next step for this to go down. There are 2 problems with this strategy. One, the Browns would prefer calling this bluff over trading him. So if you're going to play that card, you got to live that card. And that brings up number 2. I don't believe him. When he goes on these shows and he talks about how he doesn't care about sacks and he doesn't care about these milestones and eventually get him a Hall of Fame, and all he wants is to win a Super Bowl, and he will be willing to sacrifice all of that. I just saw this man celebrate a 14 sack 4 years in a row milestone, which indicates that he does care about this kind of stuff. I don't think Myles Garrett wants to sit out a year of football and miss out an opportunity to accumulate stats at the very least for another year. Now, maybe he's had a change of heart and maybe that's where he's at. But again, the Browns would prefer him sitting out than trading him for less than his value and eating a bunch of dead cap. This move is designed to force the Browns to trade you so you can play in 2025, but for a contender. But the way the Browns have it right now, they're willing to let you sit out, which means the Browns are more willing and more in a place to call this bluff than most teams. So is this a bluff that you're actually willing to live up to? And I have questions about if Myles would actually sit out for a whole year. He cares about being considered a better player than TJ Watt. Like, he's made that clear. He cares about how people view him in the context of his statistical greatness. He was the one who brought the 14 sack milestone up to everybody so everybody could celebrate it with him. Everything about what Myles has done throughout his career indicates that, yeah, he likes winning, but he also likes this stuff too. And not playing for a year would put a significant cut in a lot of that statistical dominance that he is very invested in. So he's more motivated to play this year, even if it's not in the situation he wants to be in, than the Browns are to trade him for a package that they don't want to move him for. So, yes, he could push this button. Yes, it would affect the Browns. And yes, it would mean he would eventually get traded, probably in 2026. But I don't think it guarantees that he gets moved in the offseason if he threatens this, because the Browns are just likely to call this bluff. Red button 2 is probably like where this is going, but I don't think it's likely to be successful. So we'll see if he's willing to actually not play. Now, he'll probably push this all the way up until August or September, right? Like, I think he will sit out camp, OTAs, all of that. But as far as like him sitting out the whole year, we'll see. We'll see. We will see. Red button push number 3. He's got to be willing to publicly antagonize and undermine the leadership of the Cleveland Browns. Basically, he's got to pull a Jimmy Butler. Now, there are 2 problems with this, right? One, this is not the NBA. And I think this is something that's been said a lot about this Myles Garrett situation, but I don't think enough people have explained why the NFL and the NBA are just so different. One, in the NBA, all contracts are guaranteed and players have better terms in their contract. It is not as rare as it is in the NFL for a player to have a no trade clause, to have player options, basically things that they control in their contract that give them leverage in a situation like this. NBA players have that more often than not, especially superstar level NBA players, and NFL players don't. Right? The NFL players that do have that are usually quarterbacks, which brings it up to the second problem. You can pull off some NBA shit in the NFL if you are a quarterback, right? Deshaun Watson famously did this. He pulled off some NBA shit in the NFL. It didn't work out for Deshaun, but he was able to successfully do that. The problem is Myles Garrett does not play quarterback, which means he does not have those things in his contract, which means he does not have the leverage or the control to be able to pull off an NBA move. Basically, long story short, Myles Garrett does not have any mechanisms to take advantage of that could force his way a little bit easier. And also, he's one of 22 starters in football instead of one of 5 starters in basketball, which changes the amount of leverage you're going to be able to have, right? When you're one of 58 players and you're one of 15 players on a roster. So all of that comes into this ain't the NBA. Antagonizing the Cleveland Browns, undermining leadership, that's also something that could turn off the rest of the NFL. Remember, Myles wants to be traded to a contending team. So a contending team might see that and go, I don't think I want to deal with that if you become unhappy here, right? Like if Buffalo's looking for Myles Garrett and then Myles is willing to basically, show his ass about leadership on TV, Buffalo might look at that and go, hey, what if it goes wrong here? I mean, we just had to deal with Stephon Diggs. Do we want another Stephon Diggs-like situation? And that might, deter teams from trading for him. So again, this has massive Acme Dynamite potential for Myles Garrett if he goes this way. Also, from what I can see, I don't think Myles Garrett is Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler has a long recorded history of willing to make shit awkward, of a willingness to make shit awkward and then live in it. Like Jimmy Butler thrives in it. Like he don't care how uncomfortable you are. He likes that shit, right? Like that. There's a he's done this. Chicago, everywhere he's gone, he's made it uncomfortable and then he's just sat in it. Like that's what Jimmy Butler does. Basically, what I'm saying is Jimmy Butler is a crazy man, right? He can hoop, but he's a crazy man. Myles Garrett does not come off to me as the same type as Jimmy Butler, which is to say, I think to pull a Jimmy Butler, you got to be Jimmy Butler. I don't think he's Jimmy Butler. Like I can see George Pickens doing something like this, but Myles, he just don't seem like the type. Like you got to really like not being liked to do what Jimmy Butler did. And I don't think that's where Myles is. Y'all tell me if y'all think I'm wrong on that. But I don't think he's going to do that. I think what's most likely is that he goes with button 2, right? He threatens to sit out for the entire 2025 season. The Browns call that bluff, and then we just going to have to play a stalemate until September to see what's going to happen. Myles could sit out the whole season, and financially it wouldn't really impact him that much because he's on base salary. So for those of you who don't know, the way your contract is structured, you get guaranteed money, your contract bonuses, and then you get your base salary divided by 17 over the course of the season. Myles Garrett has a minimal base salary, which means his game checks are a very small percentage of the money that he lives off of. The Browns already restructured his contract last year, so he got a lot of his guarantees up front. Like, a lot of the money that Myles Garrett will get from this contract, he already has access to. So if he loses a year of game checks, he's really only losing like less than $1 million or something like that, or like just above $1 million of his total contract value. Maybe he loses some prorated bonuses so it can get up to like $6 million, but it's not going to be like he loses $20-30 million if he sits out a whole year. So the financial penalty isn't great, which gives him some leverage if he were to pull that move to say, hey, I could do this. Problem is that the Browns, the financial reality for them if they trade him is just not great. So they're probably not going to even want to move him, and they would prefer just like having him sit there versus trading him, because they know that he's going to have value in 2026 when it's easier to move him. So I think that's where this goes. They push this red button after June 1st, 2025, because again, it's a little bit easier to trade him after June 1st. And basically they release something to say that Myles is not planning on reporting to any offseason like things. And that's when the stalemate starts, because the Browns will probably be willing to take this up till September before making a real decision. Well, not even to September. They'll probably take this all the way up till August before making a decision whether they're going to let him sit out for a year and be fine with it and try to do something with him at the trade deadline or in 2026, or if they are gonna, try to just trade him now, get ahead of it, and deal with the cap situation. I think that's what they're gonna decide, right? So we'll see what goes down, but those are really the 3 red button pushes that I can see Myles doing. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'm very interested to see if you guys have any red button push scenarios for Myles Garrett that he might resort to that I haven't thought of yet. Y'all let me know. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.